I was 24 years old, crashing a costume party at my old college buddy Alex's place in Seattle. Alex had passed away from a fentanyl overdose back in 2018, but before that, he threw these epic Halloween bashes every year at his folks' house while they jetted off to Chicago for their own annual shindig. He was obsessed with the holiday, decking out the whole place with over-the-top decorations that must have cost a fortune. Fake blood splatters, animatronic zombies, and even these massive foam walls painted to look like a crumbling castle dungeon. 2. Keep things family-friendly. I'll skip the details on the booze, edibles, and hookups, and jump straight to when everything went south. We weren't exactly sober, but who was at one of Alex's parties? Me, Alex, and a couple of other guys, Mike, Tyler, and Ben, were chilling in Alex's upstairs den, passing around a vape, when we heard these two sharp, echoing crashes from below, like someone smashing through a window. Alex bolted up, fumbling with the door in a haze of panic, and cracked it open to peek out. Screams erupted, guys and girls alike, sounding like pure terror ripping through a crowd. Even buzzed, we all froze, yelling at Alex to get back in and lock up. He slammed the door, twisted the bolt, and turned to us with a face like he'd seen a ghost. "Hide," he whispered, his voice shaking. No questions needed. We knew trouble had walked in. Alex killed the lights and crammed into the wardrobe with Tyler. I slid under the bed with Ben, while Mike squeezed into a trunk. Downstairs, the thumping music cut off abruptly, followed by a deep voice bellowing for everyone to shut their mouths. One girl yelped in fright, and then another crash and dead silence. The voice started barking orders again, but it was muffled. Then more voices joined. At least 3 intruders, maybe more, stomping around like they owned the place. We heard heavy footsteps climbing the stairs, pausing right outside our door. The knob rattled, then came the shoulder slams, until they blasted the lock with what sounded like a crowbar. The door flew open. Cries echoed from below, cut short by more shouts. I clamped a hand over my mouth, peering through the bed skirt at scuffed work boots and faded cargo pants pacing the room. The intruder yanked open the wardrobe. Alex begged, offering cash, claiming he was the homeowner. The guy hauled him out and marched him downstairs at gunpoint. Wait, no, it was a knife, glinting in the faint hall light. Tyler must have stayed hidden somehow. We lay there, hearts pounding, listening to low murmurs from below for what felt like an eternity. Maybe 15 minutes, before the front door banged shut and Alex rushed back up, yelling that they were gone. The real nightmare hit when we crept downstairs. 2 bodies sprawled in the living room. Sarah and Dylan, good friends gone too soon, with stab wounds leaking blood onto the carpet. I won't relive the cops showing up, but despite the haze of party remnants, they focused on the robbers. 4 masked figures in ski masks and hoodies, demanding $50,000 or valuables. When Alex couldn't cough it up, they forced everyone to toss wallets and jewelry into a duffel bag. After that, Alex spiraled, drinking hard, skipping classes, dropping out. He dove into pills and worse. We had one raw conversation where he broke down, pipe in hand, sobbing that he'd killed our friends by hosting the party. He OD'd on fentanyl in May 2019, barely 6 months later. It was my first Halloween in my own apartment in Portland, a cozy ground floor unit with a small balcony but no real yard, rent split with my folks' help. Around 10 p.m, I was lounging in the den, binging slasher flicks, when a knock rattled the door. I paused. Who knocks that late? No more kids out, right? Figured it was some teens pulling pranks, so I ignored it, glancing out the blinds. Empty. Stoop. Ding-dong ditch. Classic. I settled back, but the knocking returned. Harder. Insistent. "Beat it," I shouted, not in the mood. They pounded now, shaking the frame. Pissed, I yanked the door open. Nothing. I grabbed my jacket, stepped out, scanned the bushes and parked cars. Zilch. Done playing. I locked up tight and retreated to my bedroom, bolting that door too for good measure. Even with the TV blaring, the pounding echoed from the front. I nearly dialed 911, but worried it'd escalate to vandalism. It dragged on for over 40 minutes. Had to be some viral challenge. I dozed off eventually, only to jolt awake at the knocks again. Clock said 1 a.m. What the hell? I killed the TV, listened, and my blood ran cold. The sound wasn't from the front, it was at my bedroom door. I scrambled up, grabbing a lamp as a makeshift club. The knob jiggled, then slams against the frame. No kids, this was real. In a flash, I cranked my Bluetooth speaker, cued a YouTube clip of a shotgun blast, and blasted it full volume. That's your warning, get out or the next one's for you. Footsteps thudded away, across the living room, out the front, which swung wide open. I slammed it shut, called the cops. Turns out they jimmied a window while I was out front earlier. No arrests, but I installed security cams after that. It was a fierce, stormy night, the kind I usually loved, with thunder rumbling like distant drums and rain lashing against the house in soothing rhythms that made me feel cozy and alive. I was hunkered down alone, binge-watching action movies, to ride out the weather, my heart still racing from the adrenaline of the plots since I lived with my mom, but she was pulling an overnight shift at the hospital, leaving the house eerily quiet except for the storm's symphony. After finishing, die hard for what felt like the umpteenth time, around 1 a.m, I decided it was finally time to call it a night, a sense of contentment washing over me as I flicked off the TV and headed to bed. I always found falling asleep during storms comforting, the chaotic sounds outside wrapping around me like a protective blanket, lulling me into relaxation. But that peace shattered when I heard a sharp tap against my upstairs window. Not the patter of rain or the whip of branches, but something deliberate that sent a jolt of curiosity mixed with unease through me. I tried to ignore it, burying my head under the pillow, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks. Mere seconds later, another tap echoed, sharper this time, and my heart began to thump unevenly. A flicker of anxiety igniting as I realized it sounded exactly like small pebbles being thrown. It couldn't be Mom. She'd call or text if she needed something urgent. Another ping followed, and I froze in bed, my body tensing with a growing dread, paralyzed by the fear of looking out, yet acutely aware that whoever was down there must have seen the TV's glow fade, knowing I was home and awake. I clung to the hope that if I just stayed, still and silent, they'd lose interest and leave, my mind racing with rationalizations to calm the rising panic. But the pings escalated, coming faster and more insistent, each one chipping away at my composure, turning my anxiety into a pounding terror as the storm's wind began to die down. That's when I caught the low rumble of a vehicle idling on the street below, sending a chill down my spine, my breaths coming shallow and quick. A louder thunk against the window was the breaking point, snapping me out of my paralysis with a surge of adrenaline-fueled fear that propelled me out of bed in a blur. I bolted. Downstairs toward the phone, my pulse thundering in my ears, legs shaky with fright. But as I rushed past the front door, I glimpsed something through the small glass pane at the top, a pale face pressed close, peering in with what looked like a twisted, mocking grin that froze my blood and filled me with a visceral horror I'd never felt before. I sprinted to the kitchen, hands trembling as I dialed 911, my voice quivering as I whispered the situation to the dispatcher, who assured me an officer was nearby. Their calm words a thin lifeline amid my swirling panic. No sooner had I hung up than the doorknob rattled, followed by heavy shoulder slams against the door, each impact booming like thunder in my chest, amplifying my terror into a suffocating wave that made me gasp for air. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, my grip white-knuckled and sweaty, yelling through the fear choking my throat that the police were on their way, hoping my bravado would scare them off, even as doubt gnawed at me. I fled back upstairs, barricading myself in my room, every slam downstairs echoing my escalating dread until, mercifully, they ceased after what felt like an eternity. The silence broken only by my ragged breathing and the fading patter of rain. No more pebbles, just an oppressive quiet that did little to ease my shaken nerves. I heard the engine rev and speed away, a brief flicker of relief piercing the fog of fear, but it was short-lived. Sirens wailed soon after, and the doorbell rang, pulling me downstairs, on wobbly legs to face the officer, where I spilled the story in a rush of words, my description of the grinning face vague and fragmented from the trauma, regret flooding me like a cold wave for not daring to peek out the window and catch a glimpse of the vehicle. The police searched but found no leads, and the intruder was never caught, leaving me haunted by the what-ifs. Was it a robbery attempt, or something far more sinister? To this day, stormy nights that once brought comfort now trigger a deep-seated unease, locking me up in memories of that heart-pounding terror. This chilling tale didn't happen to me personally, but to my close friend Jordan, and even now recounting it sends a wave of icy dread through my veins, making my skin crawl with unease. It's all too real, a nightmare that unfolded in the dead of night and left scars on everyone involved. Jordan was on a late-night FaceTime call with his girlfriend Mia around 1 a.m. on a quiet Friday, both of them laughing and flirting despite the hour, the warmth of their connection cutting through the loneliness of being apart. She kept playfully begging him to drive over and spend the night, her voice laced with affection, but he hesitated, feeling the exhaustion from a long day weighing on him like a heavy blanket. About halfway through their chat, Jordan's eyes flicked to the background of her screen, and his heart skipped a beat. A subtle creak caught his attention as her closet door edged open just a sliver, casting a long shadow that made his stomach twist with an inexplicable twinge of worry. He pointed it out casually, trying to keep his tone light so as not to alarm her, but inside, a faint unease began to stir. Mia turned, glanced at it with a shrug, and they both dismissed it as nothing, perhaps the house settling, or a draft, their laughter resuming. But now, feeling a bit forced on his end. It was probably another 20 minutes of easy banter when the door inched wider, with a low, ominous groan that echoed through the call, amplifying Jordan's growing anxiety into a knot of tension in his chest. He mentioned it again, his voice tinged with forced humor as he joked that her younger brother must be pulling a prank, hiding in there to scare her. Mia laughed it off, assuring him it was just the open window letting in a breeze, but Jordan couldn't shake the prickling sensation at the back of his neck, a subtle fear creeping in that something was off. Time ticked by. Another half hour of deepening conversation, their bond feeling stronger in the vulnerability of the late hour, when suddenly, the closet door swung fully open with a deliberate slowness that froze Jordan's blood. A dark figure emerged, stepping out silently and gliding out of her room like a ghost, vanishing into the hallway beyond the camera's view. Jordan's heart hammered. In his chest, a surge of raw panic flooding him as he stared at the screen in disbelief, his mind racing with terror. Mia hadn't noticed, still chatting away obliviously, but Jordan's voice cracked as he blurted out that her brother had just walked out from the closet. What she said next hit him like a punch to the gut, turning his fear into full-blown horror. She was completely alone in the house that night, her family away for the weekend. Adrenaline surged through Jordan, his hands shaking as he screamed at the screen for her to lock her door immediately and call the police. His voice breaking with desperation, while he promised to rush over as fast as humanly possible. Mia's face drained of color, confusion giving way to wide-eyed terror as she whipped around and saw the gaping closet door, her scream piercing the call like a dagger, sending shivers down Jordan's spine. She bolted to her bedroom door, slamming it shut with trembling hands, and fumbling with the lock, her breaths coming in ragged gasps of pure fright. Jordan leaped into his car, his pulse thundering in his ears, tires screeching as he sped through the dark streets, dialing 911 with one hand, his mind a whirlwind. of worst-case scenarios and helpless rage. When he arrived, his heart plummeted. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the night breeze, filling him with a suffocating dread as he sprinted inside, calling her name in a voice hoarse with fear. He pounded on her bedroom door, begging her to open up, but silence greeted him, amplifying his terror that he might be too late. The police arrived moments later, their sirens a brief relief amid the chaos, and they forced the door open to find Mia curled in the corner, her body racked with sobs, eyes glazed over in shock, the trauma etched deeply into her pale face. Later, through tears and halting words, she described the horrifying moment. As she turned to shut the door, a stranger's face had been pressed, right up against the crack, staring at her with cold, unblinking eyes that seared into her soul. The cops concluded it was an intruder, perhaps a burglar who'd been hiding for hours, but they never caught him, leaving Jordan and Mia haunted by the what-ifs, their once carefree relationship forever shadowed by that night of unrelenting fear. My parents were on their honeymoon in New York City, buzzing with the excitement of newlywed bliss as they arrived at the grand old hotel in Manhattan. At check-in, they learned their assigned room was non-smoking, but with Dad being a chain smoker, they politely requested a switch, their hearts light with anticipation for a romantic stay. The front desk obliged without fuss, and they headed up, giggling like teenagers as the elevator doors closed. But as soon as they stepped out onto the floor, an overpowering wave of fresh, paint fumes assaulted their senses, making their eyes water and throats tighten in discomfort. Down the dimly lit hallway, they spotted a painter, a middle-aged, in worn overalls, with buckets, brushes, and drop cloths scattered around him as he methodically stroked the wall with a roller. Curious and a bit annoyed by the disruption on what was supposed to be their perfect getaway, they offered a friendly hello as they passed, but he didn't even glance up, his silence hanging heavy like an unspoken rebuke, leaving them feeling oddly invisible and unsettled. When they unlocked their door, the paint smell inside was even more intense, a nauseating cloud that made Mom gag and Dad cough, turning their romantic mood into one of frustration and urgency. They couldn't imagine spending even a minute in there, so they hurried back downstairs, their excitement deflating into irritation. The attendant at the desk furrowed her brow in confusion when they explained, insisting there was no painting scheduled on that floor, none at all, but she quickly arranged another room, her puzzled expression mirroring their growing unease. Lugging their bags back up, a knot of anxiety twisted in their stomachs as they approached the hall again. To their shock, the painter was gone, vanished without a trace, along with every bucket, brush and cloth, as if he'd never been there. Even more bizarre, the pungent odor had completely dissipated, leaving the air crisp and neutral, sending a chill of bewilderment down their spines. They exchanged wide-eyed glances, a mix of relief and creeping dread washing over them, but they tried to brush it off as some weird coincidence, determined not to let it ruin their honeymoon. The next morning, as they strolled toward the lobby for breakfast, still buzzing from the night's adventures, but with a lingering shadow of yesterday's oddity, they overheard a hotel ghost tour guide captivating a group of tourists. Their ears perked up when the guide mentioned their original floor, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. Apparently years ago, a maintenance painter had tragically plummeted down the elevator shaft on that very level, meeting a gruesome end mid-job. Ever since, guests reported eerie encounters, the sudden scent of wet paint filling rooms, glimpses of a silent figure with a brush, only for everything to evaporate moments later. Mum's face drained of colour, her hand clutching Dad's in sudden fear, while he felt a cold sweat break out, his skepticism crumbling under the weight of the uncanny match to their experience. Though they'd never been ones to believe in ghosts, that revelation left them shaken to their core, turning their honeymoon memories into a blend of joy and haunting unease that still sends shivers through them today. It was the first time our family tried wilderness camping as a group. I was 20 back then, and we likely wouldn't have gone if it weren't for my little brother and sister, who were twins just turning 13. It was late July, and I was actually looking forward to the adventure. We headed deep into the forests of the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. No official site, just Dad pulling the truck over on a dirt road, and we trekked about 3 miles in until we hit a quiet clearing by a stream. We pitched our pair of tents, one for me and the twins, the other for Mom and Dad. As darkness set in, sleep evaded me. The sleeping pad felt like lying on roots and stones. I tossed and turned for what felt like eternity, while the kids were out cold beside me. Suddenly, I heard the slow scrape of our tent flap being unzipped from outside. I propped up on my elbow. A shadowy head was leaning in, backlit by faint starlight. "Dad," I murmured softly. The head withdrew quickly. "Dad?" I said a bit louder, heart starting to thump. Whatever it was retreated, leaving the flap half undone. Confused, assuming one of my parents was just peeking in to check on us, I quietly crawled out and made my way over to their tent. I carefully unzipped it and peered inside. Both were snoring away in their bags. I nudged Mum awake. She grumbled that she hadn't moved all night. Dad stirred and confirmed the same, looking puzzled. That's when it sank in. Some unknown person had approached our tent in the dead of night, unzipped it, and stared inside. A random wanderer, or worse, lurking in the shadows of the trees. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the night wide awake, every rustle in the leaves sending chills down my spine. This happened back when I had my sailboat. It was a nightmare that sticks with us. My husband and I set off from the West Coast for a weekend sailing trip in the Pacific off California. First day and night were fine. We caught some fish, played, board games with tunes blasting, good times till the second night. After a quiet day on the water, we were inside playing games, no music this time. That's when we heard an outboard motor chugging nearby. We stepped out to see this guy in a beat-up dinghy, no lights idling right off our stern. He was in his 40s, scruffy beard, trucker hat. I leaned over and asked if he needed aid. He wanted spare fuel. We said sorry, none to give, and offered a tow to shore, but he said he had plenty. Awkward pause as we wondered why he'd ask. He just stared blankly, lit only by our deck, lamp, ocean black all around. He finally asked about our catch. We said slim, staying polite despite the weirdness. I asked how he navigated in the dark. He just laughed like it was funny. I thought maybe he didn't hear right. He spun his boat and called, "Nice chatting," before vanishing into the night. We were creeped out. My husband thought robbery. Sailors chat all the time, but this felt wrong. Late, far out, solo in that tiny craft. We doused lights and motored south to lose him if he circled back. Around 3 a.m., I woke to my husband's yell. I sat up to see a shadow at our cabin door. He lunged, but the guy darted out. We heard the motor rev and fade. We hightailed to shore, reported it. Nothing came of it. No clue what he wanted, but it haunts me. My college library stays open till 2 a.m. for procrastinators like me who cram papers last minute. It's a compact building with most books in the underground level called the archives. Quick layout, main stairs down, a snack alcove, and a long corridor with 3 doors into the archives. The archives are these vast chambers on either side of the hall, packed with shelves and wall desks for studying. I was down there around midnight last semester, grinding on a history thesis, parked at a desk so I wouldn't have to trek up and down. I'd been at it a couple hours, and the place had cleared out, except for a girl a few spots away. I was deep in focus, class at 9 a.m, deadline looming, when this annoying rustle started, like someone riffling through a stack of papers super fast, making that sharp whooshing sound from the far end. I tuned it out at first, figuring they'd quit, but it dragged on. After like 10 minutes, I got fed up and headed over to ask them to stop. 3 steps in, it cuts off dead. I sat back down, peace for maybe 15 minutes. Then it kicks up again, louder, like a thicker stack. The girl looked irritated too, stood up, and started prowling the aisles to find the source. It kept going, so I joined her. The noise swelled, pinpointing from one spot, so we zeroed in. She on one side of the shelves, me on the other. We combed the whole row. Nothing. No one. We hadn't seen anyone enter, and we were by the doors. No way someone snuck in. The sound died, and we slunk back to our spots. I chalked it up to vents or echoes from upstairs. I had to finish that paper. We settle in, and bam, the riffling erupts right by her desk. She shoved her laptop in her bag, muttered, "Screw this," and bailed. I was right behind her, maybe 3 seconds later. I still avoid the archives after dark, even with crowds. It was around Halloween when my buddies and I were swapping spooky tales. My pal Sarah said she'd share one about her folks' first date, but warned it was real, which made us beg her to spill it. To sum it up, they had a decent but awkward dinner, and instead of calling it a night, her dad suggested a late-night walk along the trails in Yellowstone Park. He'd hiked there a bunch for photography. They parked at a trailhead under a new moon, so it was pitch black except for the stars, and started wandering. At some point, her dad got this gut-wrenching bad vibe about the path ahead, where it dipped into thick woods. He shrugged it off and kept going, but the feeling hit harder. They pushed a bit further, and his boot squished into something soft right in the trails, middle under the trees. It was too dark to see, and the vibe screamed danger, so they both turned tail and hightailed it back without checking. Years later, married and all, they caught a TV special on a notorious killer, Richard Ramirez. He described his closest call, luring a victim into those same woods, offing her, and, hiding as a couple, came up the path. The guy stepped right on the body, but just spun around and left without a word. When I was in middle school, I went on a class trip called the Oregon Trail Adventure. It was mostly visiting historic spots along the old pioneer routes in the Pacific Northwest. One place we stopped was an old mansion in Portland, rumored to be one of the most haunted buildings on the West Coast. There are tons of legends about it, ghosts of settlers, that kind of thing. At one point, we were in a grand parlor with a big group, and the guide was droning on about some artifact. I don't recall what, but that's when I started hearing what sounded like a fiddle string being plucked, over and over. After a few times, I scanned the room for where it was coming from. No fiddle in sight, but it kept happening. I asked my buddies nearby if they heard it, but they shook their heads like I was nuts. When it plucked again, I pointed it out, but they still didn't hear a thing and teased me about it. I kept looking around. Everyone was focused on the guide except this one lady in the back. She locked eyes with me, pointed to her ear, and raised her eyebrows like, "You too?" I nodded, and right then, the guide started telling a tale about a pioneer musician who died in that room during a fever outbreak. Guests had reported hearing his fiddle tuning up at odd hours. I was baffled. Still am. I chatted with the woman after. She heard the exact same notes, but her family hadn't picked up on it at all. I remember this vaguely since I was young at the time, maybe 8 years old, in our old farmhouse out in rural Montana. My bedroom was on the second floor, but it wasn't meant to be a proper room. It was more like an add-on to the barn loft, kind of a storage space turned sleeping area. The folks who owned the place before us used it as a spot for their kids to play cowboys and Indians. My room had this massive wardrobe door that led right into the loft space. The wardrobe was built up high, so you'd climb a rickety wooden ladder to get inside, and it had these heavy swinging doors. It was crammed full of old toys, board games, and junk from my early years. Being a kid, I always felt uneasy being so cut off from the rest of the family, especially with that big wardrobe looming in the corner. Then there was this one stormy night. I was in bed, spooked after watching a horror flick with my folks downstairs. Suddenly, I heard a thud, like a toy box tipping over up in the wardrobe. I bolted out of bed and dashed to my parents' room. They said it was nothing, probably just the wind or settling wood, but they saw how terrified I was and let me crash on their floor that night. Next evening, I'd mostly forgotten about it until I heard it again. A clatter like a bucket of marbles spilling out up there. I ran to my parents again, and my dad was getting annoyed, but he let me stay with them once more. The following day, my mum and I checked the wardrobe, and sure enough, there was a scatter of marbles all over the floor, rolled out of their tin. I was convinced someone was hiding up there, but Mum said it must have just toppled on its own from being unbalanced. That night, Dad locked their door, saying he was done with my imagination running wild. I couldn't sleep. I lay there frozen, my mind racing with kid fears, waiting for another noise. It was maybe an hour later when it shattered the quiet, the creak and bang of the wardrobe doors swinging wide open. The faint glow from the moon outside lit up a silhouette standing right there at the top of the ladder. I screamed bloody murder, terror flooding through me like ice water, a feeling that still hits me sometimes. The figure scrambled down the ladder, bolted across my room and out the window onto the porch roof. My mum burst in, freaking out, while Dad chased after whoever. It was down the stairs and out the front door, but he never caught them. The sheriff's department investigated, but they never found the guy. Turns out, some drifter had been squatting in our loft for days, knocking stuff over while trying to stay hidden. We boarded up that wardrobe after that, and I never slept easy in that room again. It was my freshman year at Stanford University. I'd just finished settling into my dorm room, with all my boxes unpacked and my parents heading back home after a teary goodbye. That afternoon, my roommate showed up, a guy named Ethan who struck me as the most awkward person I'd ever encountered. I introduced myself as Jake, extending my hand for a shake. He stared at it blankly for a second, then let out a nervous chuckle and gave me this limp, clammy grip. I had to prompt him for his name. He mumbled it was Ethan. I tried chatting him up, but his responses were just grunts or one-word answers, punctuated by forced smiles. Within minutes, we were both glued to our phones in silence. I was already dreading the year and mentally drafting a room change request. Ethan seemed like just a shy introvert at first, but it didn't take long to realize he was way off. I hung out with some guys from the hall that evening. They seemed chill. And when I got back, Ethan was still parked in the exact same spot on his bed. I tossed out a casual hey, but got nothing. It was only 10 p.m. But with classes starting soon, I flipped off my light and crashed. Sleep didn't come easy. Ethan stayed up scrolling until 2 a.m. When he finally shut down, I dozed off, only to wake up an hour later. The curtains were pulled back, letting streetlight flood in, and there was Ethan, perched on his desk chair, staring right at me. I bolted upright. "Dude, what the hell?" He muttered, "Sorry," and turned away. Next morning, he was gone when I woke up. First time I'd seen him leave. It was orientation weekend, full of campus tours and events. During a walk through the quad, I overheard some students whispering about that weird guy over there. Sure enough, it was Ethan, crouched behind a fountain, picking at the grass and muttering to himself. The guy didn't notice, so I kept quiet. But later I joked about it with those students to break the ice. We hit it off and planned to grab food later. Back at the dorm, good news. Housing approved my switch to a new room down the hall. That night, after hanging with my new friends, I returned to find Ethan sitting rigidly by the window, facing the door like he was waiting. "What's up?" I asked. "Nothing," he snapped flatly. I booted up my computer and noticed tabs open, social media profiles I'd never searched, old photos from my high school folder. Ethan had clearly been poking around while I was out. When I confronted him, he yelled, "No!" before I even finished. I knew he was lying, but with the move tomorrow, I let it slide. As I rummaged for my charger, my desk drawers felt rifled through, papers shuffled, stuff misplaced. I woke around 3 a.m. to rustling. Flipping on the light, there was Ethan kneeling by my backpack, hands inside. "What are you doing?" he stammered. "Thought you had my charger by accident." Bullshit. I told him to back off, too creeped out to escalate. Next day, I met my new roommate, a laid-back guy named Ryan. Worlds better. We chatted normally before lights out. For the third night straight, weird noises yanked me awake. This time, scratching like nails on wood, coming from outside the door. It wasn't steady, maybe every 20 seconds. I crept over, peered through the peephole. A shadowy figure hunched low, fiddling with the lock. Heart pounding, I called campus security. They arrived fast, and when I opened up, they had Ethan detained in the lounge, a makeshift lockpick in his pocket. I spilled everything. The staring, the snooping, the switch. They hauled him off. Turned out he got expelled for stalking violations. I never saw him again, but that early brush with his obsession still haunts me during quiet nights on campus. I spent a year at UCLA where I quickly fell in with a solid crew. We'd hit up beaches or bars most weekends. One crisp November Friday, when the group plans fell through, me and 2 buddies decided to chill at a secluded spot in the nearby Canyon Preserve. A hidden overlook with a view of the city lights. Perfect for bonfires away from prying eyes. It was off the beaten path, known only to a few locals for low-key hangs, maybe some stargazing or light drinking. We packed a cooler of sodas and snacks, built a small fire, and just shot the breeze. About life. As the evening wore on, laughs flowed easier, and soon we were cracking up over dumb stories. One friend was doubled over when the other suddenly hushed us. We froze, rustling in the brush, like footsteps crunching gravel not far off. We doused, the fire quick, hearts racing, could be rangers or wildlife. The spot was remote, so encounters were rare. It sounded like one person circling slowly. A twig snapped closer and we bolted, grabbing the cooler and scrambling down a trail. Glancing back, a silhouette emerged from the trees, tall, hooded, moving deliberately toward our spot. We hid behind rocks, watching as the figure poked around our abandoned site, shining a flashlight. It lingered, then headed our way. Panicking, we cut through underbrush, thorns scratching us up. The footsteps followed, gaining. One friend tripped, twisting his ankle. We helped him limp faster. Finally, we hit the parking lot, jumped in the car, and peeled out. Back at the dorms, we spotted a figure lurking by the edge of the lot, ducking behind cars when headlights swept by. It vanished into the shadows eventually. We crashed in one room, nerves shot, but by morning, we were joking it off as some hiker or prankster. Still, we steered clear of night hikes after that. The what if of being truly hunted lingers.